Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project conceived entirely to let me spend more time than I'd ever get on the radio with interesting people. James Rebanks, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Shepherd and writer, it says at the top of my notes. That's a first, I think.
That never appeared on anybody's sort of careers advice at school, I can tell you.
Your careers advice said zookeeper.
That's the only way they could work out how somebody would work outside in the 1990s.
Is that what happened? You kind of told them what you liked and they put it through the algorithm and it came out with zookeeper.
It literally came out with zookeeper, and the reason I repeated that in a book about growing up as a farmer's son was it seemed to me to say something hilarious about how limited that computer program or that world was about my people.
Mine said DJ, actually, would you believe? But as in touring the village halls of Worcestershire, playing Aha and Duran Duran records on Saturday night. So a similar experience. For people who don't know, you're more writer than shepherd in the eyes of the British public, but it is, at least to start with, about life on your family's farm, where you have been for over 600 years. It's quite nice notes, this. Over 600 years and just over 600 sheep.
Yeah, that's right. And the cool thing about the 600 years is that's as old as the church books are, basically, in the archives.
So it probably goes back further.
Well, we're on page 1, the Rebanks baby was born, or the Rebanks old guy died, or whatever. So who knows how much further back it goes than that, but maybe a very long time.
And your books, The Shepherd's Life, English Pastoral, and latterly The Place of Tides, which we'll work our way towards throughout this interview, are the reason why you've managed to carve out this quite unique space as a man of letters, but also still very much a man of the soil.
Yeah, and I've no idea what's going on. I sort of do on one level in that, from when I was, maybe we'll talk about it, but from when I first fell in love with books when I was like a late teenager, I remember reading them thinking, oh, I could do that.
Did you?
Or that's the coolest thing in the world. How do you do that? Maybe was the more clear thought.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem unusual to me. In fact, you would read books. Even now, I read books about my heroes, and they'll be writing about their childhoods or their backgrounds or their people, whoever they are around the world. And it immediately makes me think of mine. And I think, why not? Why not? Where's the rule book that says you can't be a farmer and a shepherd?
And yet, for your grandparents, reading books was a sign of idleness.
Definitely for my grandmother. She was quite hardcore about it. She thought.
So if they found you reading a book in the house, it would be proof that you were not doing something more constructive.
There must be something better to do. Haven't we brought you up properly? And that wasn't true of all of my family. So I'll talk about my mum's side in a minute, but definitely for my grandmother's side, the reason that they'd been farmers for a very long time was that they have a very set worldview with a very powerful work ethic. Very judgmental, actually, about anything that wasn't what they did. But that's probably what got people up early in the morning on rainy mornings to do the same thing for generation in, generation out. And whilst there are limitations to that worldview and those people, they were very proud.
Yes. And
even when I was a kid flunking out of school to try and join their world, I had no lack of self-esteem or pride. Yes, I flunked out of school, and yes, that's a bit like lots of other kids that might flunk out of school now, but there was a farm somewhere in the background, and there was a degree of status in our community, and there was a degree of pride, and I think that's quite different to maybe what happens to some kids that...
But you knew your place in the world, perhaps, even...
I think so. It feels very old-fashioned now to look back at, but yeah, it sort of didn't matter what you did at school, didn't matter what the rest of the world thought. If you left school and you worked productively and you did your job right and you looked after your farm, you looked after your fields, your land, and you were reasonably good at working with the sheep and cattle, that was something socially useful that had a degree of respect and status in our little universe associated with it. And probably quite a bit of mistrust associated with wanting to leave it or be different in any way. Because I grew up in the late 20th century, I'm very aware that was limiting for other people. So one of my best friends was gay, and his memory of that time was very difficult.
I'm sure.
Being something different in that world was very painful for him, so my experience wasn't that, but I'm aware of both sides of that.
We didn't start flunking out until a little later. You got to secondary school, so let's back up a little bit. You're aware from... So to clarify, your dad was farming a rented farm, which was a few miles away from the family farm where your granddad was in
Yeah.
place. People who've read The Shepherd's Life would recognise that in that context, early on in your life, your granddad was, if anything, an even bigger presence in your life than your dad.
Yeah, so my granddad was a sort of old-fashioned farming patriarch, albeit on a small farm in a small part of the world. Seemed big to me as a boy. My dad seemed somehow shrunk or made small by it, because he had to do what this old guy said, and at the time I didn't question that. I just thought he's the big important guy and my dad's not quite as big, or I don't know what's going on with my dad. Why is he not as big as the other guy? I now know, looking back, that that's what patriarchs do, isn't it? They shrink the people around them, or they limit their opportunities, or can be very limiting. And the older I've got, the less romantic I am about my grandfather. I can see that he possibly wasn't the greatest husband in the world, possibly wasn't the greatest father in the world. Yeah, I think there's things in that mix I would admire and things I'd be more critical of now.
I mean, he was a proud farmer called William Hugh Rebanks, granddad to me. From my first memories until his dying day, I thought the sun shone out of his backside. I wanted to be just like him one day. So even that's a work in progress.
Yeah, I think things changed, don't they?
Yes.
I think maybe what's happened, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, particularly since my first book, just realising how much I loved my dad and how poor my judgment of him when I was really young. And I think that's because he changed. So my grandfather died 30 years ago. My dad died 10 years ago. So I had nearly 20 years of seeing my dad become more confident, getting on top of his own world, getting rid of some of the debt that was crippling him. Just seeing the best of him, like growing to his best version of himself.
You said when you were writing the first book that in some ways it became a letter to your dad while you were writing.
Yeah, he was dying of cancer at the time. And I'm very aware. Well, I hoped he would read it before he died. He was not a man that was particularly literate or bookish. He's dying, so I'm feeling very sore about that, and I don't want him to die. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll probably get one shot at showing my dad this book about him. It's going to be a long life afterwards if he dislikes it, or he thinks I'm a prick, or I've done the dirty on him or something. So and in the last few weeks of he sort of read it and was dead within a couple of months after that. And I was desperate to know what he thought of it. In some ways, I stopped caring about being published. I stopped caring when the critics said, "What does Dad think?" We all, many of us want to impress our dads, right?
Yeah.
He made me laugh. He said when he read it, he said, "What took you so long?" I'm thinking, "You silly old goat! I've worked for you for nothing for 20 years. You used up all my free time. That's what happened." But he also, I dedicated the book to him. I said I loved and respected him, and when I said to him face to face, I said, "What do you think of it?" And he said, "You've got a bit soppy, haven't you?" Because I dedicated it to him, which is like farmer shut down emotion version. And I went into the kitchen and said to my mum, "What does he really think?" And she said, "He cried all the way through."
Oh, stop!
Yeah. No, it gets better. And then I said to my sister Jane, about a week later, I said, "Just see if you can get anything else out of him, because this is the only way I'm ever going to know." And he said to her, "He's only going to make me the hero of the book." And I think he knew in his bones that book didn't just turn up at the last minute, that 20 years earlier I was an angrier young man. I was partly angry at him, and he'd have got a real kicky in that book 20 years earlier. And I did turn it around on him. But it's nice, I would urge anybody listening to this, if you've got aging parents or something, tell them what you think about them. Because in that book I did tell my dad exactly what I thought about him, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the love and the respect. And when 2 days before he died, I knew he'd read it, and I went to see him and I said, "Are you and me," this is very Cumbrian exchange, but I said, "Are you and me good?" And he just held out his hand and we shook hands and went, "Yeah, we're good." And when he died, I thought, I'm sorry, I'm going to make myself cry, but I remember thinking, there's nothing else to say. I've said all the stuff, in a good way.
Yeah.
There's nothing went unsaid. There's no love went unexpressed.
It's a wonderful thing, that.
It was a wonderful thing. And I was very lucky that book, The Shepherd's Life, went, I'll stop crying in a minute, went on to be very successful. And do you know what? None of that mattered a fig to me.
Because you're set free by your dad's reaction, really. Set free from all the worries about...
I think so.
Having said that, what would he have made of its success? Would he have got his head around the idea how the story of his life could end up being an international bestseller?
I'll never know. I'll never know, will I? I think he had a weird belief in me that I was this sort of slightly weird hybrid creature. I'm partly like him and I can do these other things. I've got a funny feeling he might not have been surprised.
That's nice.
I think he has a sort of, yeah. So it was never expressed to me, but to other people I know, he sort of thought I could do weird things that he couldn't do.
Well, what you've given people listening there is a little insight into the fact that it's possible to approach the end with a loved one, with everything that needs to be said being said. It's because it's a bit glib sometimes when you say to someone who's bereaved that they could have been in no doubt about how much you loved them, but it's actually incredibly comforting to hear that when you have lost someone.
I think so. It's always. It's given me a huge amount of peace ever since I lost him. I just think, we did the whole journey.
Yeah. So when did that weirdness first appear? When did that duality first appear on the farm?
I think I was always a slightly odd creature. So, I think a lot of other farm kids weren't. We would say my dad would have said weren't to chase out the house. They're just out there. They're on the tractor. They're doing the things. I was a tougher nut to crack. I was loving Saturday morning TV. I was watching classic films. I was when I was 8, 9, 10. I was reading books. And did I want to go out in the rain and work with my dad? Not really.
Okay.
He sort of he has to be this sort of slightly tough northern dad to get me out of the house to get me doing it. And that could be a story of regret and loss of another life maybe I could have had. But I don't feel it that way, because there was a point down that path where I did begin to love it. I think, you're a bit rough with me to get me to do this originally, and damn it, now I love it.
But you never lost the little boy who liked reading books.
No, that other part of me's still there. So I'm like, all right, okay, so I'm a bit like my own people, and I've always felt like somebody almost watching my life as a movie from the outside.
Have you?
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know whether I got it from books or films or whatever, but...
As a star of a story?
I wouldn't say so much star.
Well, no, all right.
More like the recorder.
Okay.
I remember, this is probably egotistical nonsense, but like when you watch the movie Platoon, and there's the young man he's not really the hero, he's the chronicler of it. And I remember whenever I watched those films thinking, oh, that's me.
And were you aware that what you were living, your way of life, was worth recording? I mean, we should probably say a word for people who don't know exactly what a fell farm is, and because it ties in with the new book as well, doesn't it? The Place of Tides, the relationship between man and nature, or humanity and nature. So what is a fell farm, and when did you, given that you're surrounded by farm children, and we only ever have one childhood, and it's the only childhood we'll ever have, and we don't know at the time that it's extraordinary or different or abnormal. What?
So a fell farm is basically a poor farm on marginal land in the upland parts of Britain. I happen to be from the Lake District. It usually means that you have some sheep or cattle that go into common grazing land alongside other people. It pretty much means that you keep livestock for a living. It means you're part of... There is a very, very strong, very vibrant, even now, culture associated with that, about when you do the work, how you do the work, who you do the work with. Like the autumn sales of sheep that have just gone in the last month, or cattle. These are the defining events of people's years and their lives to win some of those, we would call them tup sales, where the rams go, or a bull sale. Why would a kid think that was worth recording? I think the answer, I possibly answered a moment ago, is my mum wasn't from our world. My mum was had met my dad when she just started university. She'll be laughing if she ever listens to this. I think she did one term doing geography at Norwich University, and in our family that makes her an intellectual. But she was from like the industrial working class in Bury, just outside Manchester. They'd worked in cotton mills, really, really poor. They'd died her granddad had died on the Somme. Her dad had fought in Burma, and over the two generations before my mum, education had been their way out of pretty grimy working class northern lives. So both sides of the north, the sort of pastoral and the industrial, meet themselves in my house, and I think my mum pretended, even to this day a little bit still does, pretends to be your standard farmer's wife, and is actually this very bookish, thoughtful woman who just found herself in that world. And even now, I'm not sure 100% feels like she totally fits in with the other farmers' wives. She'll sort of secretly sneak off from the party to go home to read whatever it is, novels or whatever. And so I think that being an insider and an outsider was sort of ingrained in my family. I'm aware that my dad and granddad think they're engaged in the most important cultural activity on earth, hill farming. And I'm sort of aware from my mum's slightly puzzled look at the other side of the room that this is slightly odd and that maybe everybody else doesn't understand it.
It makes some of what came later beginning already to sound a bit like destiny, isn't it? So you take this twin background to school, to primary school, where you did, quite often on full disclosure, that seminal teacher appears who really did make an enormous difference.
I had an amazing teacher, she's still alive, called Mrs. Craig, who I think made everybody in the school actually feel special in their own ways, but she made me feel special because she knew I was really into the story she was reading me. Like, she'd read me, or read us. See, it's a mark of how good she was. I think it was for me. She'd read us the Odyssey or things like that in like a children's version, or she'd read us the biblical stories, and I would just be sort of spellbound by that and think it was cool. And yeah. So, you know, it's in all of these stories, there's all of my memories, there's always stories. I've always been obsessed with, and still am. I love stories.
And then when you get to secondary school, what were you like academically first? Did you produce?
So I was not at primary school. I worked hard. I didn't feel it. I was in no way alienated. This lovely teacher. I wasn't the cleverest kid in the class. I was probably like the third or fourth cleverest kid in the class. Okay. I went to secondary school and...
Hang on, before we go there, did you demonstrate a facility with language? Did Mrs. Craig see in you someone that could tell stories, could write stories?
She, she said, I'm not sure I've lived up to this, but she did say to my grandmother at the school gate one day, she said, I think James could be something extraordinary if he put his mind to it.
Right. So that answers my question. And you say you haven't lived up to it. I just read this from the new book. This is one of my favourite writers, John Banville, describing The Place of Tides as a magical book, at once a lament for a world in danger of disappearing and a celebration of an indomitable spirit determined to preserve it. James Rebanks has written a quiet yet ringing masterpiece. You can't pay for an endorsement like that.
I'm very, very, very lucky that anybody likes my work like that, particularly John Banville.
Well, yes, and what is interesting is that you wouldn't have pressure from home for academic performance, in a sense, because the presumption is that you will follow onto the family farm, and that would be true of everybody in your immediate community.
That's true. So I think through secondary school, I think what I'm starting to clock is it'd be a lot more convenient for my dad and granddad if I just ditch the book stuff and just be your standard farmer's son.
Which is odd for people who haven't grown up in your world. It's almost the negative, the opposite of the normal experience. And for your mum's world as well, where education was the way out of the...
Totally. So my poor mum's in the background going, don't, sort of not saying out loud, but what I'm hearing is sort of, don't listen to them completely. Right. Keep going, keep reading, keep doing this. And I'm having none of it. By the time you get to 13 and 14 and you're highly ignorant like I was, all I'm thinking is, I've got to stack up in this world. I've got to be like them, and that meant. And actually, there was a pride in ditching school. There was a pride in
to get out and become a man,
dropping it, being a man in what seems now like a very archaic working class male rejection of education.
So, did your mum know that you would follow your dad onto the farm, or was there a little part of her that wondered whether you might make a break from it?
I don't know. I think she might have thought I was a little bit different.
Yeah,
and I probably for a sort of 10 or 15 year period just didn't give her a damn thing to cheer.
But as you've said, I mean, quite quickly, you did fall in love with the way of life. Yeah. You've said in another interview, my earliest memories of working with my father and grandfather with the sheep, it just felt right. So you might have been distracted by books or Saturday morning television, but these were people that seemed to belong in their place in the world, that did things that I thought were meaningful and dignified. I thought, and I still do, if I'm really honest, I thought there was a lot of dignity in how they lived and how they worked. I still do with a lot of working class people, and I suppose one of the things I'm trying to do with my books is having somehow got this weird platform where people will listen to me or read me. I feel an enormous loyalty to... I said in one of my books, I think the first book, that the history of our landscape was the history of the nobodies, and I mean the sort of working class nobodies, and I don't mean nobody as an insult. Of course.
And I
the people that don't normally have books written about
that's right. Could the smart kid that was from the nobodies write books that were as good as the smart people write? Could I make nobodies the heroes of books? Do I still find that quite an exciting idea? Yes, I do. I feel like it's my little bit of fun rebellion. I can make the world care about my granddad or my grandma or a woman on an eider-down island who nobody else thinks is important. Yeah, it's like for me, it's like a fun, culturally sophisticated way to put two fingers up at the world and go, actually, you're wrong. Value these people.
And the only difference is that your dad and your granddad and latterly you are not beholden to a boss. So that's where the words working class are interesting, because and possibly where elements of the dignity come into this, because you're beholden to nature, you're beholden to God or whatever you believe in, but you're not beholden to the lord of the manor or the boss.
So that's true. There's a kind of mad independence streak in our family, and you're absolutely right. And I did use the words earlier, but I will qualify them now. So my very first memory, till I was 4 or 5 years old, my dad actually left the farm and worked in a quarry, and we live in a council house. And he, not I, but he looks very working class at that time. But he's actually a farmer's son, and when the row that meant he went to the quarry was finished, he is actually part of a farm, and he is in a different situation to some of the other people living in those council houses who are more authentically working class. So farmers are somehow alongside that system, aren't they? The poorest farmers sort of sometimes look like they fit in it, sometimes don't, and it's fundamentally different because there's a farm in the background. There were limits to their freedom. They were on a rented farm, so they do have to about once or twice a year doff their caps to some aristocrat who owns the farm and pretend that they respect him. They never did at all. But you're right, as long as you sort of fit within those constraints, that's quite a free life. And you can be quite contrarian and quite autonomous. And I've definitely struggled to shake that my whole life. I struggle with employment and things like that. Yes. There's a sort of freedom to that, which is a privilege and is lucky, and I'm definitely infected with.
I wonder if it's easier to get up at the crack of dawn and then do back-breaking work until dusk if no one's telling you to.
Yeah, so like my dad and my granddad don't think their lives are hard.
No.
They don't think their lives are hard. Lots of people nowadays, they went and did it, would think this is bloody hard. My dad doesn't think that. My dad thinks it's entirely normal and natural. And I think you ask him, I think you're right probably, you ask the same person to do the same job for a wage for somebody else who's got a boss, and it feels really different.
It does, immediately.
Yeah.
It's weird, that.
It is. And
I'm struck by the ancientness of it as well. By the lineage.
And it gets all a bit complicated and blurry, but on my farming side of the family there's a sort of romance about work, because work's about doing what you want to do and what you love and what everyone around you does. On my mum's side of the family, I think a bit more scepticism. Like, hang on a minute, we came from cotton mills, and that ain't, we're not in charge, and that's a bit ugly, and they don't care about you, and you might want to get out of that as quickly as possible. So all of that's there in the background.
I was surprised that your teachers at secondary school seemed to be quite condescending towards the farm families. Is that the right word?
I think that's true. Since I wrote about that, I've met quite a few other people that I went to school with. I've had one or two tell me it was nothing like that. That was not their experience. The vast majority have all said it was exactly like that. Right. Well done.
So you're going nowhere. You're going to end up doing dead-end jobs on farms.
I think so. Like, I literally can't remember anybody ever mentioning the university in our school even once. And that's not true now. That school isn't cursed for all time. It's quite a good school, and my nephews go to it, and lots of good people have come out of that school, and there's lots of good education happening in it. But at that time, it was a bit rough. There's quite a lot of bullying, and I remember being sort of quite scared in secondary school sometimes, and thinking,
really, even as a big lad from the farm.
But you're like 12, aren't you? And the 16-year-old lads, and they're in the National Front or whatever the hell it is, and they beat people up in the corridors. And I remember thinking, this is a different world.
But you could never imagine anybody wanting to leave the Lake District, wanting to leave Cumbria.
I was baffled why the teachers thought it was automatic that we would move.
Right.
And why they could see nothing of any value in what my people were.
Gosh, that's a phrase, where they could see nothing of any value in what your people were.
I think that's how I felt.
Right.
Most of the time when you feel something, it's not necessarily accurate.
True, but it's true. It's your truth, as they say in therapy and places like that. It is your truth, isn't it?
And I know in other media that you do, I hear you talk a lot about Brexit and things, and I think when I look back to my childhood and the people I grew up among, I can sort of in a way see where some of our troubles have come from, some of our disaffections come from, or some of our ideas that no one cares about us, or maybe we need to kick the apple cart over because this world's not set up for us. It's all about these other people somewhere else who are...
No, I get that. I understand that. I don't know what you should have been with your O-levels in religious studies and woodwork. You could have built an ark.
We might need one the way things are going.
But you couldn't wait to get out of school, and it truly was one of the happiest days of your life. And you go straight. Well, you were already working on the farm. You're never really not working on the farm, but now it's morning, noon, and night.
Yeah. To be honest, not in winter, not at night, because you get the jobs done maybe by 6 and it's dark, and that was a big thing for me because there was no internet then. What do you do? And I had about 3 or 4 years at the latter part of school where I didn't read anything. I thought, like a lot of teenage boys, reading was nothing to do with me anymore. But actually the weirdest thing about leaving school was literally within about a week I started picking books up off my mum's bookshelf in the nights, because I'm like, well, I live miles from town. I can't drive. I haven't got a girlfriend. I've got no money.
Dad's in charge of the telly.
Dad's in charge of the telly. In those days, there was only one. People listening to this will remember that. I was like, oh, there's a posh TV, but it's in the posh room. You're not allowed to go in. What was that all about? So I started picking books up, and literally, I can remember being aware of the irony of this even at the time. Within a month of leaving school, I'm reading like translated cool French novels or Hemingway or something, and thinking, oh, this is cool. Like, you've just left school.
It's extraordinary.
I feel like going back and talking to myself and going, you've literally just rejected education, but you're reading a bloody French novel or something.
Because it was in the house, because your mum had it.
Just in the house. It's my choice. Suddenly I'm choosing to do this. No one's making me do it. And by the way, oh, wow, I really like this. Like, this is really cool. And I remember being just excited by this first 6-10 books.
There's a little echo there. I'll point it out because people listening will have noticed it. What I just said about it's easier to do this if no one's telling you to with regard to back-breaking work. You've just said exactly the same thing with regard to academic work or reading.
How irritating must that be if you're a teacher? Like the blessed teachers have spent 5 years trying to help me to be intelligent, and the minute they stop trying...
What's your relationship with your own intelligence? Because it wouldn't be necessarily an attribute that is valued in the context of your dad and your granddad's life. Obviously, in your mum's, it would be more. But again, you presumably have got a foot in both camps. You must know you're intelligent.
So nobody's ever asked me this before. I don't think I'm about to be way more revealing about myself than maybe I should. But I'm a little embarrassed by it.
Okay.
Like... Yeah, that silence was me thinking, shit, you've just exposed the code.
I don't think that's unique.
No, so you don't want to... I felt and still feel very loyal to the tribe that I'm from, the sort of family people of that part of the world. I don't in any way want to seem cleverer than anybody else. So the classic northern thing, isn't there? There's a particularly Scandinavian thing. They call it Yanti's law, which is don't think you're cleverer than us, don't think you know more than us, don't think you're better than us. I don't think that's necessarily enforced by other people.
Yeah.
It can be internal, can't it? You just like, oh, whatever you do, don't be the irritating one who thinks he's better. And I remember working on the farm when I was 16, 17, 18, and being highly irritated by... I'm not anymore, but then irritated by students. Yeah. Like, you think you're better than... Like, it was that sort of... You know, it's maybe a silly movie, but sort of Good Will Hunting.
I knew you were going to say Good Will Hunting. That scene in the bar when he comes up to the... Yeah. I knew you were going to say that.
That did resonate. I mean, that film's got all sorts of problems, but it did resonate with me when I'm young, because it was true on one level about what working class lads who do physical labour think about students. And the different life courses they take, and a low level hatred that sometimes exists between them. And I felt that. I knocked about with a bunch of lads that were carpenters and postmen and builders and sparkies and things like that. And most of my associations with being clever were these kids that came back at the weekend to look down their noses at us, or or went out with the girls we wanted to go out with, or whatever it was. And so when I change my life and I get an education, I'm a little bit worried about, like, am I becoming one of them? Have I just left my tribe? Is everyone going to still like me? Or am I like, do I have to go and play with those kids at the other side of the bar now? Because I don't want to on one level.
This is one of those seminal moments then when you meet your future wife, Helen, who you could show this side of yourself to. You're about 21 when this happened. So
I was beginning to get bored of being a sort of clown anyway in pubs and things. And then she just came along and had zero tolerance for it. She was just like, you're smart, why are you pretending to be dumb? You read books, why are you not telling anybody you read books? You're quite well educated in this weird self-help kind of way. Why are you not at school? And
what answers did you have for her?
Well, I think when you meet somebody really smart who you also find attractive and you think you might want to be with, there aren't any answers. That's the point, isn't it? You just go, okay, fuck, this is embarrassing. She could see right through me. This trick doesn't work anymore, and I wasn't finding it funny anymore anyway. Right. It was time to change things in my life. I wasn't getting on very well with my dad at the time. The farm was failing economically at the time, and I didn't really have an answer to her criticisms because they were right. I was like, okay, I better go back to school at night. I better do some other stuff.
And you did?
I did, yeah.
You went to night school?
Yeah.
And then you went to Oxford?
Yeah, that was some jump, I can tell you.
Well, and was that, how much of that was down to Helen and how much of it was down to other circumstances?
So the actual, like, knowledge or ability to write an essay or something, strangely I'd because of all the reading I did, I'd been like this obsessive...
Osmosis.
I'd been this obsessive reader. Nothing about that fazed me particularly. It was little things that were tripping me up. I couldn't, it's going to sound daft, for the 9 years I worked on the farm after I left school at 15, I never wrote anything.
Right.
I didn't have to use any handwriting.
The actual mechanics of writing.
Just basically writing. Yeah. And a week before I was due to do my A-levels at the end of a night classes course, Helen said, you do realise you'll have to write like 3 or 4 pages by hand. And I'd been writing these essays on like a word processor, early computer thing. Yeah. And then the first time I tried to do it, I could barely hold the pen. I was getting a stress on, and I was getting tripped up by the mechanic, like the simple mechanics, not the clever. So the clever stuff wasn't bothering me, but I couldn't write 3 or 4 sheets without my hand falling off because I just worrying about how ugly my handwriting was. And I remember being quite childish and churlish about it. She bought me a book about like a kid's book about handwriting to copy the things, and sort of intensively schooled me through a few weeks so I could get enough scribbled on the page to get a mark. And so that's
Why Oxford?
For the completely stupid reason that I liked the historian AJP Taylor.
Yeah.
And I thought, if nothing else, like if they don't let me in, at least I'll have a day out and I'll go to the place where AJP... So I applied to Magdalen College, Oxford. He'd been a history professor there. He was a sort of hero of mine, this sort of contrarian, left-wing, progressive historian with interesting ideas. He was also a great writer. So I just thought, I'll go there. And my wife Helen laughs her head off, because you fill a UCAS form and you put multiple options. I didn't even put a second and third option because I was fairly indifferent to going on one level.
Yeah.
It felt like a bit of a game. Like,
it's the payoff for doing the A-levels. So you did the A-levels learning for learning's sake. Yeah. You wanted to mould your mind more.
Yeah. And I was sort of playing it like a game. I thought, if they think I'm really clever and like a winner, I'll go and play the game.
Okay.
But if I'm not really clever and I don't get into like the top place, I just won't bother going. Which is highly dismissive of loads of great education that happens below Oxford and Cambridge.
Well, it's not a normal path to this point in your life, is it? So I don't know that you can be expected to behave normally when you get there. But
so I'd also had a kind of, maybe I'd watched Good Will Hunting too many times. But I thought, if you're going to be in this movie, you've got to be smart.
Wow.
There's no point being average, or it's a shit movie.
Yeah.
And I went and far from, I don't know, somewhere in my head I thought, they're not going to really want me here. And actually, I found the exact opposite. I was in a room full of smart professors and they were intrigued by me. They started asking me fun questions. I got into, I think an argument that they were trying to engineer to see what I'd got.
Yes.
I remember having a lot of fun with them. And, one of them was trying to tell me I hadn't said, trying to pick holes in my argument. The other was pretending to take my side. This one for like whatever the period of time. But I remember looking at them as I came out the room, and a couple of them were smirking, and I thought, "Oh, you just enjoyed that, didn't you? I think this went well.
This is okay."
Yeah, and
you get in.
Yeah, I got in.
Was it a nice period? Because I know you missed home a lot. You'd go back between terms, but you spent a lot of time in the library. You've used the phrase "studied like a machine." So again, James, it's like there's a duality going on here. You're somehow managing to be fully committed to being a student, but you're still the farmer.
Yeah. So the sort of slightly weird thing was, I think everybody else had been watching too much Good Will Hunting. They cheered me off, like even my mates did, a bit like in the movie Good Will Hunting.
That's lovely.
So they cheered me off to war, to go and fight with the posh people.
Yeah.
Like, don't you dare come back unless you beat them, son. So I get that, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I got myself into? I better go down the library. I better work 10 hours a day.
So you're carrying their hopes.
I'm sort of carrying that in
their faith.
Or I think I am. Maybe they couldn't care less.
Well, this is romance again, isn't it? With you as the kind of chronicler or hero of the story.
Yeah, which is all a bit egotistical and
it's
weird.
Not egotistical.
I'm now older. And
might be weird. It's not egotistical.
and the slightly sad thing is, I didn't particularly enjoy that period of time.
Did you not?
I was treating it like a sort of battle.
Okay.
I now look back and think, oh, I was so determined to dislike those people or to think that they would dislike me. I completely forgot to be nice to everybody.
Yes.
I just had my own little bubble, which was all about proving to everybody I did belong there. I could do it, and I did prove that. I did well.
Came out with a double first, which is.
But I now meet quite lovely people who happen to be there at the same time, and I just think I could have been nice to you, couldn't I? And
what were you like to them?
I don't think I was horrible. I don't think I was rude. I was just disinterested.
Aloof.
More like I have to beat you.
Oh, okay.
Wow. Not physically beat you or humiliate you.
No, I know. I understand.
Just you're another human being, and I need to come out of here near the top, and I need to go past you and over you.
You're sounding like a sportsman. You're sounding like you approached academia like other people approach a rugby pitch.
I think I approached it all in a very silly, masculine way. I'm not sure I would go back and do it again.
But as we've said, you did something right. You come out with a double first, which is a result that would prompt some people to wonder whether this might be the life for you.
And I nearly could have done. If Oxford was half an hour away from Cumbria.
Do you think you might?
And you could have juggled being in that world and going home and doing the things I loved and being with the people I feel comfortable with, I might have done. But it felt like it was going to demand that it swallowed you up for the next 20 years.
So you could do both as a student, but you couldn't have done both at the next stage because you'd have to commit more to one or to the other, and you chose the farm.
I think so, and I'd never really given up on the farm. So like, what do I want to be down there for 20 years for? And I was getting to the point where I wanted to marry Helen and had other silly male ideas like we can't get married. I can't go and see your dad and tell him I want to marry you if I'm a student. I need to get like a real job. I need to somehow earn some money. And
was it tense? Was there tension there? Was there a large part of you that wanted to stay in Oxford, or was it a relative no-brainer once you'd factored everything else in?
I think I didn't really want to be part of that world long term. All I really wanted from that world was that it would let me write books, and I thought, okay, they'll let me write history books, and then I'm there long enough to realise, oh, it doesn't really work like that. They want you to be a teacher. They want you to serve your time. You do a PhD in something quite obscure, and that will earn you the right to have a teaching place. And 5 years after that, you might be able to write about the thing that you studied in the archives, and that's all important stuff that historians do that I admire. But I think I was beginning to see that there's other things I could write. Right.
So the knowledge, as opposed to the ambition, the knowledge that you would write books one day was well established by the time you left Oxford.
I think I believed I would.
Yeah, and so did Helen.
Yeah.
And so perhaps did some of your teachers at Oxford.
I don't think they'd have been. I won some writing competitions when I was in Oxford. Yeah. Like little things.
And so did Mrs. Craig, while we're making a list of all the people who are not surprised by how things have turned out.
And some of this is starting to sound a little sort of mythologizing, but there's another side to this, which is all the things I didn't do.
Yes.
And I think as a 50-year-old man looking back now, or being aware of my own children growing up, I think I respect balance more than this slightly obsessive tale I've told you about winning. And,
okay, yes.
I see my own kids having a bit more balance, and I think, oh, that's good. You realise that there's more to life than beating somebody or winning or being the best at this or the best at that.
Yeah.
And I think it's taken me quite a long time. I think my wife knew it all along. She is more balanced than I am, and I'm just this sort of slightly obsessive person who likes battles and simple situations where you work the hardest or you try the best. And
that's the farmer in conflict with the thinker, isn't it? Because the farmer does X, Y, and Z in expectation of A, B, and C being the result. It's all quite straightforward and
you sort of solve all the problems just by working harder and slogging.
Yeah.
Maybe I just became my dad version of.
And yet the thinker goes to places through an entirely unexplainable process.
Yeah, and I think he's looking for the weaknesses and flaws in the self, right?
Yeah, always. Gosh. 2012 then becomes probably the next seminal moment after, if Meeting Helen is the first one. 2012, two things happen. You go on Twitter, but crucially, you're also working a bit with UNESCO in a kind of sustainability consultancy role, and you get sent to the Vega archipelago, which is a group of islands off the coast of Norway that are so remote they make fell farms look like discotheques.
That's right. So my fell farm's about 10 minutes away from the nearest Chinese takeaway, so it's not so terrible. But no, Vegas is is a plane journey of about an hour north of Oslo. Then it's a boat journey of 45 minutes out to the main island, and then the places that ultimately ended up writing about in Vega are another 45-minute boat journey out to these tiny little rocky islands in the middle of nowhere. And yeah.
So you meet Anna there. She's the original duck woman.
Yes.
Tell us what she does, because I mean, if I say it, people won't believe me.
So basically, she's one of the last living people, and there's about 20 or 30 of them, let's say, on that part of the coast. No one's quite sure how many actually, because they're hanging on in slightly invisible ways. And they're the last of this group of people who, going back to the Vikings and further beyond, they were called farmer fishermen. They live on these tiny rocky little islands. They try to grow crops in the fields, but it's hard up there, and short seasons and crops fail. They have pigs and chickens and things in their barn. That's all right, but doesn't make you wealthy. And then what do you do when you get really hungry? You've got to know how to exploit the sea or steward the abundance of the sea at its best. So they're great fishermen, and some of them realise, or actually maybe it's the other way around, eider ducks realise that the safest place to lay their eggs is under the wooden houses of these Viking men and women. That there's a circle of fear that will put the predators off, and that's actually the safest place to be a duck. And so what these people discover is that these eider ducks are coming to them. And if you build more huts and more shelters and build more nests with lovely dry seaweed in them, more and more ducks will come. Why is this a good thing? Well, maybe somewhere in the distant past they could eat some of them, but that's long since become a memory because they leave something more valuable than their bodies, which is when they sit on these nests, they're pulling with their own beaks the downy feathers from their chests. The nest becomes a sort of large handful of fluffy grey eiderdown, and when they take their ducklings back to the sea, they leave behind their rent, which is this incredibly valuable handful of eiderdown, which if you clean from hundreds of nests, becomes an incredibly valuable commodity in their world. And by the mid-19th century, some of these people are affluent. They call them the duck and down kings and queens. And this lady Anna, who I go to stay with and write about in the book, she's the descendant of these people. But she's the descendant of them late in the 20th century when this is all started to fall apart. The seas are overfished. There's invasive species like North American mink. Everything's collapsing and deteriorating. And she's been a cook in an old people's home and a mother and a very ordinary, unremarkable, unheroic, I'm doing in inverted commas, person in her community. But she decides, aged about 50, that she will go back out to this edge island place that her people are from, reversing all of the 20th century state policies that were moving people inland and moving them away from the edge. And she wants to go back and rebuild it and attract wild eider ducks to come and nest on this island, including rowing out to these tiny little islands, making stone nests around them each day, a few stones more until they trust people, so that they'll come slowly back to her island and she can rebuild paradise. It took her 15 years to get any of this to happen at all, and she was unpaid. So I met her in 2012, and I think it was a little bit. She reminded me of my grandmother and grandfather, and those people.
I got a chill when I shook her hand. I was suddenly unnerved by how familiar she seemed. She was my people.
Yeah, I think I'm as I talk about this book, I'm beginning to realise what I've done, which is all the people that anchored me in the early books or in the early parts of my life had vanished about 5 years before, and maybe it's a thing about men and middle age as well. But I was beginning to feel a little bit unmoored, or like, where are the heroes? Where are the people that are sure? I used to feel like I knew who was sure about things, and now it's just me, this sort of worrying figure, not quite sure what the hell's going on. And the world, you well know, the world around us is chaotic and confusing. And when I met her, I felt calm, sort of instantly calm. Like, oh, I need to be around people like you. You're the people I came from. I know what this is. I know how you navigate the world, or I think I do. And I found her magnetic and couldn't wait to go back. And that's what I've written about. I end up telling the story of her last season being an eider-down woman, because she's getting too old to do it in this remote place. And I went and I helped her, Anna, and Ingrid, her friend, and they sort of take me under their wing, and I helped them physically more than I'd intended, and they helped me emotionally and intellectually more than I'd expected.
You're there for 10 weeks?
Yeah, I'm there from late April to the beginning of July, literally in a place with no electricity apart from when they turn the generator on, and no phones and things like that.
I'm halfway through it. It's an extraordinary book, and it's almost impossible to categorise, which is why I wanted to approach it from all the different angles that we've approached it from, because especially that last bit where you're kind of embarked on the same trajectory that she's been embarked on in life.
Yeah. So there's definitely a parallel between her and I as these sort of slightly fierce last kids of the old world. And does everybody have to believe that her and my love of the past is of any significance? No, they don't. I think what I see as a writer and a person who thinks about things is a lot of good in those people and some of those ways of living. Not that they're the answer to all of our problems. No. But for example, when I'm on that island and I have to turn my phone off and I have to be silent because the ducks come and nest under the house, and all there is to really focus on. So you lose all the electronic distractions, you lose all the sort of media distractions. All there really is to focus on is the natural things around us. And I realise that she's a superhero at that. She can spend 4 hours looking out the window studying ducks coming up the grass or whatever. And you think, wow, my hands are shaking because, like, where's the stimuli? Where's the chocolate? Where's the phone? Where's the internet? And yet she's one of the, in a very simple way, one of the wisest, most sensible and most decent people I've ever met in my whole life. And is utterly disinterested in many of the things that we distract ourselves with. And would gently, and not so gently, tell me off and say, focus on the things that really matter. Focus on the waves. Focus on what the birds are doing. And this might sound crazy to other people, but I recently read Donut Economics by Kate Raworth, the book about, which is basically saying we need to live in a world with less economic growth, with less consumption, less stuff. And I really believe somewhere deep down inside that means probably living a little bit more like this woman on this island. Can I get my happiness? Can I get my stimuli from the things around me? Can I learn to be very happy in a simpler life in which I travel less, in which I buy less things in shops, in which I expect less this thing in my hand to excite me and thrill me? And I don't think I'm making this up. My observation was I think I've met some of the most content, satisfied and happy people I've ever met in my life living quite simple lives.
Always anchored, though, in nature.
In nature and with a sense of purpose and meaningful work, right? And I think one of the, I don't want to pontificate too much, I think one of the sad things about industrial or post-industrial life is it's deliberately made a lot of work low-skilled or low-status or low fun or low skill. It's deliberately doing that, and I think that can leave an enormous amount of people feeling that they don't know what the meaning of it is.
And you were no one else could really have written this book then. This book, given the collision of two worlds that were actually a lot more similar than any outsider would ever have been able to allow. What we haven't talked much about, is your relationship with nature at home. It's I don't know whether that's a coincidence or not, but the importance of nature and the connection with nature has only popped into this conversation when we started talking about Anna.
That's true. So, one of the things that I don't think I mean depressed in a clinical sense, but one of the things that got me down about the work I did for UNESCO was I was travelling around these places all around the world and hearing really grim stuff about people out exceeding the limits of the places where they were. Like, just to give you one example, so where they would send me to Angkor Wat, okay? And the city of Siem Reap is there, and the city of Siem Reap, I forget the numbers, but it's grown to, let's say, 1 million people. And then you go to talk to the people in the jungle where the monuments are, and they say it's all falling down. And you say, why is it falling down? It's falling down because there are too many people living in Siem Reap and there's too many people visiting. They use too much water, and all of those statues that we're used to seeing in all of the sort of Jungle Book type animations, they were built on wet sand foundations. So the water table is really high under the monuments and it keeps the sand wet and things stand. When you put 1 million people 10 miles down the road, the water's going down, the sand dries out, and everything's falling apart. Now, I could give you 50 other examples of trashed rainforests or trashed reefs in Thailand or whatever else. But I was going to see this stuff, and really hard to not let it get to you after a while.
Of course.
To the point where I've got like a job title, you're an expert on sustainable tourism, and you're thinking, really? Where's the sustainable bit? I'm starting just to get really depressed by this. And it sent me home, but you almost feel overwhelmed by it. Like the despair can get pretty big. And although we've done lots of very cool things that I'm proud of at home on the farm about making it more nature friendly, rewiggling streams, building wetlands, we've planted 30,000, 40,000 trees. We're just about another 20,000 in the ground this winter in the right places around the sort of system that we've designed. I think I was starting to lose hope, or the despair becomes the thing you focus on, not the doing. And then when I was with Anna out on our island, she's facing every bit as grim a situations, or worse, worse. So all of our plastic waste, all of our timber... You
collect a lot of plastic waste.
It's all washing up the coast of Europe from Britain. It's all got British writing on it. Washing up on these islands. She's fishing it out, putting it in bags, trying to clean the beaches up. Work, trying to mend her little island and piece of the sea. But the one thing she definitely did give me was that sort of fierceness back. I was like, okay, if she can get up every morning and do that when she's age 70, I can stop whinging and I can get up and do better. And I think let's sometimes physically do better, isn't it? Let's plant more trees, let's mend a river. And I think a bit of it is intellectually, can I do better? Like, other arguments, we could just skip the argument, and myself and an environmentalist can find a really good compromise. And we can skip the 5-year bit where we argue with each other and say everything's impossible. I don't like you, you don't like me. Can we? And I really think we can. I really, really think we can. I think we've seen it this week, haven't we, with a lot of debates about the budget and the people. We quickly get into sort of culture wars type stuff between farming type people and non-farming type people. And I'm starting to think, sort of 9 times out of 10, the answer isn't the fight, whichever side you're on. The answer is somewhere in the middle. It's the actual. Can we just get something done better? Can we do better? Yeah. I think we nearly always can do better. Is my feeling on it.
That, I mean, so it's not a bad little lesson to learn as your half century ticks around, is it? This notion of there must be a better way.
I think so. I mean, I find. I hope it's clear that I'm no longer sitting here saying I fight things or I try to overpower them with effort or slog anything. I'm not. I do feel like I've changed over my lifetime.
But you can't live like that forever. It's exhausting. You're describing almost a form of hypervigilance. Like you might not be waiting for the next attack to come in, but you're looking for the next dragon to slay.
Yeah, and actually the book does go to that place later in the. You may never got to that part yet, but it does go to the point where I'm essentially burned out.
Yeah.
I've tried one model of being a man, and I have absolutely slogged it to death.
Yeah, and in many ways it's worked enormously successfully well, but it's not making you happy.
Not making you happy, burning you out. Yeah. Yeah, and that's not necessarily fun to talk about. But I'm already from the book getting lots of messages from men going, "I've done exactly the same thing."
Yeah,
I think there's something about the way we're programmed, or definitely in the past, programmed men and boys and what we thought they were meant to do.
Yes,
and
really such an important conversation. I mean, there's plenty in it for women as well, and indeed the long list of endorsements on the back includes as many women as men. But it's your story in the context of your life, but it's Anna's story in the context of her life that creates the magic in a way. The reason I mentioned Twitter, I was conscious of the clock ticking, is because that is where I first came across you, where most people first came across you in 2012, the same year that you went to the archipelago for the first time. You started, I mean, it almost again feels like a sort of aligning of the planets, and that is where your facility with language, your ability to tell stories in entirely tiny little snippets about life on the farm, about the work that you were doing. You just used the phrase "mending a river," which is not a phrase I've heard anybody else ever use before. But that snowballed really quickly, didn't it? Because I thought naively, before I read more about you, that the books had come about as a consequence of the social media celebrity. Like there was a weird coincidence kicking on. But you left Oxford knowing you were going to write books, and it was Twitter just proved to be a catalyst for that.
Yeah, it really just gave me a way to show people
that
I could write stuff. I had written some stuff for magazines in the intervening 20 years, or whatever that was, 10, 12 years since I left university. But no, I remember. Yeah, I mean, I'm tired of it now. I don't know whether I think it's a force for good anymore. I think it must be a force for.
The social
stuff.
I'm the same. You and me both.
So there's so much to worry about it. But did it give me an enormous opportunity?
You were one of the reasons to be on it, James.
And people,
it was a thing of beauty.
It was just, and I remember there was some really bad snow blizzards where I'm literally like rescuing sheep from a snowstorm.
I remember.
And there's no weather reporters can get out anywhere in rural England, and I'm sort of tweeting, and I got this message from one of my friends back in that time, and he said, "There's something wrong with your social media. It's going up by about 1,000 people a minute." And I looked at it. It was like one of those silly things in a cartoon that was going up. I think it was on the American news networks and stuff. And you're like, this is the good. I think maybe that's the good side of social media. Like a person who doesn't really have a platform can talk to a whole bunch of other people, and if it's interesting or it fills a need. Those are the naive days of the past, weren't they?
But they do feel naive now, but they're not, because you were telling a story, and it's as old as it's older than fell farming. It's as old as humanity itself. We want to know stories about things,
and it did totally unlock. I mean, the truth is, for me, it totally unlocked the writing thing. Within a very short period of doing Twitter, I was asked to write for Atlantic Monthly. All I knew about Atlantic Monthly was Ernest Hemingway once wrote for them. I thought, that'll do. Give me a pen. I stayed up all night writing this thing for them, sent it to them at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you could almost see in the editor's email reply, the laughter, because he was saying, we didn't mean like work through the night and write it.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow would have been fine, or next week. And he said, by the way, this is like a cracking piece. And I did super show off, because I thought, right, if you're going to let me have the chance I've been asking for, I will take this with both hands. And then agents and publishers were ringing me up the next day saying, can you write a book? And I'm like, are you joking? I've been wanting to write this book for 20 years, just let me go. And
the rest is history, which is for once not even a cliche in this context, because it is, and it's a history that takes in the two books, and culminates in the Place of Tides, which oddly feels a bit like a coming home. Not a new departure necessarily, but a bit like you've reminded yourself, and working with Anna and Ingrid has reminded you of who you used to be. Yeah,
I think that's definitely true. I think it's ironic, because I was writing about my farm in the previous two books, but the success of them, the things that happened to me, which I feel very blessed that would happen to me, made my life sort of even harder, even more manic. You get away from being the person who just spends a lot. I still spend most of my life on the farm, but it was just getting a bit polluted. I was just getting a bit far away from the peace of mind that I once had, that had made me me. And And I had to do something slightly odd. And my wife, I think, will forgive me someday for taking those
10 weeks off.
Those 10 weeks off. To be fair, I think she knew I needed it more than anybody else. She sort of pushed me out the door and went, "Go and sort yourself out. Use this time." I think she knew I'd write about it too, so maybe not the worst thing for our family. But
yeah.
And I sort of unravelled a little bit in the peace and quiet of the island. That's part of the story. And just had to reset and go, who am I again? Oh, I'm none of that stuff. I'm just me. And what really matters, my kids, my doing the best I can on my farm, trying to write the next book that I might care about.
Yeah.
But I think what I've lost is that absolute manic thing that I had when I was young, and it did work very well. And maybe I'll become very unproductive or very untalented in the future, but I'm going to let that go. I need the next part of my life to be healthier and more balanced and more, I think, healthier for people around me as well.
The Place of Tides is out now. The farm is up and running.
Can I tell you my mad thing about the farm?
Go on.
So, I was saying at the start of this, one of the things you live for as a farmer is to have those moments. So we had one of those moments a week on Friday ago. We went to Castle Douglas. We started breeding belted Galloway cattle 5 years ago.
Yeah.
With the intention of trying to take everything we've learned and try to breed really good ones. We're not messing about. We try to do things well. We took the first one we ever dared take to the main society sale at Castle Douglas a week on Friday. And from somewhere, I don't quite know what the gods have decided to bless me with this, it made the breed record price of 20,000 guineas, which is £21,000. And I'm still walking on water. My farming life's going as well as my writing life. And somewhere along the way, I'm going to pay the price for this. But I'm a very lucky man at the moment.
You deserve it, and throughout your writing, throughout all three books, you tell us, even if you don't realise it yourself, why that is. What would you choose if you had to pick one? The John Banville endorsement, or the sale of the bull?
That feels such an insult to John Banville, but I'll tell you that the bull's got to win. It's got to win. Partly because my 17-year-old daughter's just left school. She dreams of being a really good farmer. She'll be a better farmer than me. I know that already. She's way ahead of where I was at 17. And as we're showing the bull, she said, "Dad, I've got this. Step back." And I have to step behind all the other farmers while this 17-year-old kid walks this 1-ton bull round in front of the judge, shows it all off. I didn't even know she could do all this stuff.
Wow.
And then she wins the class, and she does the same thing, walks it on the ring while the auctioneer is selling it. And I think it's things like that I'm starting to realise my life. This is the real blessing of my life. It's lovely if people think you're great. It's lovely if people say lovely things about your writing. But when you see your own flesh and blood, your kid, growing into something she's good at, it's on another level altogether, I think.
James Rebanks, thank you.
Pleasure.